Do not mistake this wedding for love, Emily, because you will have my name, my protection, and a crown, but you will never have my heart. Alexander Blackwood spoke quietly enough that the hundreds of guests beyond the closed doors could not hear him, yet every word landed with greater force than a public humiliation. Emily Carter stood beneath the golden lights of the private corridor outside Blackwood's grand ballroom, still wearing the white wedding gown chosen for a ceremony that had united two territories before people who believed they were witnessing history. For one dangerous second, her carefully controlled expression almost broke. Then she lifted her chin. "That is fortunate," she replied softly. "I do not remember asking for it." Alexander's gray eyes narrowed. He had expected tears, perhaps anger, perhaps another carefully rehearsed speech about duty. He had not expected defiance from the quiet Omega, who had barely spoken throughout their wedding. "Then we understand each other. I understood this arrangement long before you did." Something in her answer caught his attention, but the ballroom doors opened before he could question her. Applause swept through the corridor. Emily immediately smiled, graceful and composed, and walked beside him toward the waiting crowd. No one noticed her trembling hand except Alexander. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here." Now, back to Emily. For the next 2 hours, she performed every duty expected of the Alpha King's new bride. She greeted council members, thanked elderly guests, remembered the names of children introduced to her, and never once allowed the loneliness behind her eyes to reach her smile. Alexander watched from across the ballroom, irritated by how easily she seemed to belong in a place he had never wanted her to enter. This marriage had been negotiated after months of political pressure. Blackwood needed stability along its southern border, and Emily's family needed access to trade routes controlled by Alexander's territory. To him, the arrangement had always been a transaction disguised as tradition. He assumed Emily viewed it the same way. Near midnight, the final guest departed. Alexander found Emily standing alone beside a tall window overlooking the snow-covered grounds. "Your rooms are in the East Wing," he said. "Mine are in the West." Emily did not turn around. "How considerate. You will have everything you need." "Everything?" Alexander heard something unusual in the question. He stepped closer, within reason. Emily finally faced him. Her smile had disappeared. "Then I suppose honesty would be too expensive." Before Alexander could answer, she walked past him. A folded piece of paper slipped from the small pocket hidden in her gown and landed silently near his shoe. Emily did not notice. Alexander picked it up, intending to return it, until he recognized the royal seal stamped across the bottom. His own seal. He unfolded the document. It was dated 6 months earlier, 3 months before anyone had supposedly proposed their marriage. At the top was a confidential warning addressed directly to Emily Carter. Alexander read the first sentence twice. "If you refuse the marriage to King Alexander Blackwood, the Southern Territories will lose their protection before winter." He looked toward the empty corridor where his new wife had disappeared. For the first time that night, Alexander wondered whether the Omega bride he believed had been forced upon him had actually walked willingly into a marriage she knew would make her miserable. Alexander remained in the corridor long after Emily disappeared into the East Wing, the confidential letter still open in his hand. He read it again, searching for some detail that would confirm what he already believed about their marriage. But the words offered him no comfort. The Southern Territories had faced severe shortages after 2 failed harvests and an early winter. Without Blackwood protection, merchants would avoid the mountain routes, supply agreements would collapse, and thousands of families could lose access to food and heating fuel. Emily had known all of it months before Alexander had even been approached about the marriage, yet she had never mentioned the letter. By sunrise, Alexander had convinced himself there had to be another explanation. He placed the document inside his desk rather than confronting her. Trust had never come naturally to him, especially when politics wore a pleasant face. Emily, meanwhile, began her first morning at Blackwood alone. No family waited outside her room. No familiar voice asked whether she had slept. A housekeeper named Margaret showed her through the eastern wing with professional kindness, explaining the dining schedule, council traditions, and household expectations. Emily listened carefully, remembering every name. "You may request anything you need, Your Majesty," Margaret said. Emily glanced around the enormous sitting room prepared for her. "Could everyone simply call me Emily when we are not attending official events?" Margaret hesitated. "That is not customary. Neither is marrying a stranger who lives on the opposite side of the building. But apparently we are becoming flexible." Margaret tried not to smile. By breakfast, the story had already traveled through the household that the new queen was either unusually kind or dangerously clever. Alexander assumed the second. When he entered the dining room, Emily was speaking with a young kitchen assistant about her mother's recipe for apple bread. The conversation stopped immediately. Alexander took his seat at the opposite end of the long table. Emily looked at the distance between them. "Should I send you a letter? Or, can you hear me from there?" "I can't hear you." "Wonderful. Our marriage is progressing already." Alexander almost reacted, but controlled himself. "You seem comfortable." Emily slowly set down her coffee. "Is that a criticism?" "An observation. You should practice observing longer before reaching conclusions." The word struck closer than she could have known. Alexander thought of the letter locked inside his desk. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" he asked suddenly. Emily became completely still. "You already decided why." "I'm asking now." She studied him for several seconds. "And I'm wondering why you suddenly care." Alexander could have shown her the document. Instead, suspicion won. "Perhaps I want to know what you expect from Blackwood." Emily stood. "Nothing that belongs to you." She left breakfast untouched. Over the following days, she learned the estate without asking Alexander for anything. She visited the kitchens, spoke with groundskeepers, and spent hours reviewing community reports that had been left unread in a side office. Alexander heard about every conversation. To him, her interest looked strategic. To the people she met, it looked like someone finally listening. On the fourth afternoon, Alexander passed an open doorway and heard Margaret speaking quietly with Emily. "You do not have to eat dinner alone every night." Emily's answer came after a long silence. "I know. Then why do you?" Another pause followed. "Because being unwanted is easier when nobody is watching you pretend not to notice." Alexander stopped outside the door. For reasons he could not explain, he could not make himself keep walking. Alexander eventually forced himself to walk away from the doorway, but Emily's words followed him into the council chamber the next morning. He told himself her loneliness was not his responsibility. Their marriage had been created to stabilize territories, not satisfy romantic expectations. Yet when the council meeting began, he found himself noticing the empty chair reserved for her. Emily arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a stack of reports. Several council members exchanged disapproving looks. Councilman Richard Hale leaned back in his chair. "Your Majesty, these meetings concern Blackwood administration." Emily stopped beside the table. "Then I appear to be in the correct room." Alexander looked up. "Why are you here?" "Because 37 families in North Hollow have been waiting 6 weeks for heating assistance." Silence settled over the chamber. Emily placed the reports on the table. The requests were approved, but the delivery orders were never issued. "Hale fronet." "That matter is being handled." "No, it is being filed." Emily opened the first report. "There is a difference." Alexander should have been irritated by her interruption. Instead, he studied the documents. Every page had been marked with careful notes. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "The community office." Hale gave a humorless laugh. "And in 4 days, you believe you understand Blackwood better than this council?" Emily met his gaze without raising her voice. "No, I believe cold families understand cold houses better than any of us sitting in this room." Alexander felt several council members turn toward him, waiting for him to correct his wife. He looked at the delivery records instead. The problem was obvious once someone bothered to examine them. A clerical authorization had been sitting and signed for more than a month. "Release the supplies today," Alexander ordered. Hale's expression tightened. Your Majesty, there are procedures. Then improve them. By sunset, trucks were moving toward North Hollow. Emily never mentioned her role. She returned to the East Wing and spent the evening answering letters from residents who had somehow learned what she had done. Alexander learned too. Within a week, people arriving at Blackwood began asking for Emily by name. She listened to farmers, teachers, shop owners, and omegas who had never expected anyone inside the royal residence to remember their concerns. Alexander watched her influence grow, and the old suspicion returned. One evening, he found her in the library studying another set of community records. "You have become popular quickly," he said. Emily looked up. "Should I apologize? You arrived less than 2 weeks ago, and people already bring their problems directly to you." "Perhaps because I answer." The words landed harder than she intended. Alexander's expression cooled. "Be careful, Emily. Influence can look remarkably similar to ambition." Her face changed. Not dramatically. That almost made it worse. "Is that what you think I am doing?" "I do not know what you are doing." Emily slowly closed the folder. "Then perhaps you should ask before accusing me. I asked why you married me. You refused to answer. Because you asked like a king interrogating a stranger, not a husband trying to understand his wife." Alexander stepped closer to the table. "You knew about the consequences before this marriage was proposed to me." Emily froze. He immediately knew she understood. "You found the letter." "Yes." For the first time since their wedding, genuine fear entered her eyes. "Alexander, you were never supposed to see that." "Why?" His voice remained quiet. "What else are you hiding?" Emily stared at him, and whatever fragile possibility had begun forming between them disappeared behind a wall of disappointment. "More than you are ready to hear," she whispered. Emily held Alexander's gaze for several seconds before gathering the reports from the library table. "Not tonight," she said. "You do not get to accuse me of building influence, discover one piece of my past, and suddenly demand every truth I have." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That letter concerned my territory. It concerned thousands of people who would have suffered if I said no." "Then tell me who sent it." Emily looked toward the dark windows. "When you're ready to hear an answer without deciding what it means before I finish, I will." She walked away, leaving Alexander alone with a question that followed him for the next 3 days. Their conversations became painfully formal. At breakfast, Emily discussed schedules. At public events, she stood beside him with flawless composure. When their eyes met, however, Alexander saw the distance he had created. On the 4th evening, Blackwood hosted a winter reception for regional representatives. Emily wore a simple silver gown and spent most of the evening speaking with community leaders. Alexander watched Councilman Hale approach her near the fireplace. "You have adapted remarkably quickly," Hale said, "almost as though you planned to make yourself indispensable." Emily's expression remained calm. "Helping people should not make anyone indispensable, Councilman. It should make them useful." Alexander heard the exchange from several feet away. He should have recognized the insult hidden inside Hale's words. Instead, his own suspicion spoke first. Later, when he found Emily alone near the ballroom doors, he said, "You enjoy proving everyone wrong." She turned toward him. "Excuse me. The council questioned whether you belonged here. Now half the territory speaks your name." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "You think I help families get heat because I wanted applause? I think you are very careful about how people see you." Her face went completely still. "And how do you see me?" Alexander hesitated, but pride filled the silence before wisdom could. "As someone I was required to marry and still have no reason to trust." Emily absorbed the words without answering. Then she gave him a small, painfully polite nod. "Thank you for finally being honest." She walked away before he could respond. An hour later, Alexander noticed she had not returned to the reception. He told himself it did not matter. Then he found her shawl on a chair beside the glass doors leading to the winter greenhouse. Snow pressed against the windows outside as he stepped into the quiet room. Warm lamps glowed among dormant roses and evergreen plants. At first, he saw no one. Then he heard a broken breath from behind a row of tall citrus trees. Emily sat alone on a wooden bench, her back turned toward him. One hand covered her mouth as tears slipped silently down her face. There was no audience, no political advantage, no carefully constructed image. She was simply a woman trying desperately to cry without anyone hearing her. Alexander stopped. Emily whispered to herself, "You knew he would hate you. You knew, and you came anyway." Alexander felt something inside him shift. His shoe touched the stone floor. Emily heard it. She immediately wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and stood before turning around. The transformation was almost instant. "Alexander." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red. "I was just leaving." He could not speak. Emily walked past him with her head held high. For the first time since their wedding, Alexander did not see an ambitious Omega, a political arrangement, or a stranger occupying his home. He saw the woman he had wounded, and the worst part was realizing she had never once asked him to feel sorry for her. Alexander did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily sitting alone beneath the greenhouse lights, trying to silence tears no one was supposed to witness. By morning, guilt had sharpened into something more uncomfortable: awareness. He entered the dining room earlier than usual and found only one place set at the enormous table. "Where's the Queen's breakfast?" he asked. The attendant hesitated. "Her Majesty usually eats in the East sitting room, sir." Alexander looked at the empty chair across from him. Since when? Since the morning after the wedding. He had never noticed. Later, while crossing the East Wing, he passed a small writing room and saw Emily through the open door. She was seated at a desk surrounded by letters from North Hollow. Beside her rested a second stack, tied neatly with blue ribbon. "Those are not community letters," Alexander said. Emily looked up, guarded immediately. "No. Who are they for?" "No one." He frowned. "You write letters to no one." "Apparently." She closed the drawer before he could see more. Alexander should have walked away. Instead, he said, "I owe you an apology." Emily became still. "For which part?" The question carried no cruelty, only exhaustion. Alexander had no answer that did not sound inadequate. "Last night, you were honest. I was unfair." Emily studied him as if searching for the trap. "Those are not the same thing." "I know. Do you?" She stood. "You saw me cry, Alexander. That does not mean you suddenly understand me." "I did not say I did." "Good." She moved toward the door, but he stepped aside before she could think he intended to block her. Something in her expression changed at that small gesture. "I'm trying," he said. Emily gave him a tired smile. "Try quietly." So he did. Over the next several days, Alexander stopped questioning and started observing. He learned Emily visited the kitchens because she remembered every employee's name. She reviewed community requests because no one else answered them quickly enough. She wore the same 3 simple dresses despite having access to an entire royal wardrobe. She never used his authority to demand anything. One afternoon, Margaret mentioned that Emily had declined a private carriage because an elderly resident needed transportation to a medical appointment. That evening, Alexander discovered Emily had missed dinner entirely. Again, he found her in the library, asleep over a stack of reports, one hand still holding a pen. A cold cup of tea sat beside her. Alexander stood in the doorway longer than necessary. On the desk lay an unfinished letter. He had no intention of reading it, but the first line was visible beneath her hand. "Dear Mother, I wish you were here because I'm beginning to forget what it feels like to be known by someone." Alexander looked away immediately. He quietly removed his coat and placed it over the back of a nearby chair, close enough for her to reach when she woke, but not touching her. Then he ordered dinner to be kept warm. As he turned to leave, Emily stirred. "Alexander," he stopped. She looked at the covered plate an attendant had just brought into the room, then at him. "Did you do that? You missed dinner. You noticed?" The question was so simple that it made him ashamed. Alexander met her eyes. "I am beginning to." Emily said nothing. But for the first time since the wedding, when Alexander walked away, she watched him go without looking relieved. The change between them did not arrive as forgiveness. It arrived quietly, through small moments neither of them knew how to name. The following morning, Emily entered the dining room and stopped when she saw two places set near the center of the table instead of opposite ends. Alexander was already reading a report. "Did the table shrink overnight?" she asked. "I decided shouting across 20 feet was inefficient." Emily sat carefully. "How practical of you. I have been accused of worse." A faint smile touched her face before she could hide it. Alexander noticed, but said nothing. They ate in silence for several minutes, until Emily reached for the coffee at the same moment he did. Both stopped. "You first," Alexander said. "Careful. People may think marriage has softened you." "I will deny everything." This time, Emily actually laughed. The sound surprised both of them. Alexander looked down at his coffee, allowing her the dignity of pretending he had not noticed how quickly she became guarded afterward. Later that afternoon, they attended a community meeting in North Hollow. Alexander expected Emily to stand beside him while he addressed the residents. Instead, she moved through the room speaking directly with families she already knew by name. He watched an elderly woman take Emily's hands and thank her for helping restore the heating deliveries. Emily immediately redirected the praise toward the workers who had completed the job. There was no performance in it. No ambition. Alexander finally understood how completely he had misjudged her. During the drive back to Blackwood, snow began falling across the mountain road. Emily sat beside him in the rear seat, watching the white landscape pass beyond the window. "Why did you never tell anyone what you did for North Hollow?" he asked. "Because the families needed heat, not a speech about who helped them. You could have taken credit." She turned toward him. "Would that have made you trust me?" Alexander had no answer. Emily looked back toward the window. "That is what I thought." The silence between them changed. It was no longer hostile, but it was not comfortable either. "Emily," Alexander said, "I cannot undo the way I treated you." "No, but I can stop pretending I had a reason." She looked at him then. "You had reasons. You were angry about the marriage. You distrusted the people who arranged it. You simply decided I was the easiest person to blame." The accuracy of her words left him nowhere to hide. "Yes." Emily seemed surprised by the admission. "That was unexpectedly mature. Do not become accustomed to it." Another small smile appeared. For the first time, Alexander felt something warmer than guilt when he saw it. That evening, however, the fragile peace lasted less than an hour. Alexander entered his office and found Councilman Hale waiting beside his desk with a sealed folder. "We have a serious problem," Hale said. Alexander removed his coat. "What happened?" Hale placed several copied documents before him. They contained private Blackwood trade schedules, territorial supply routes, and confidential council correspondence. Each page had apparently been transmitted outside the territory during the previous 2 weeks. Alexander's expression hardened. "Who had access?" Hale hesitated just long enough to make the answer feel deliberate. "Only members of the council, Your Majesty." And Hale placed one final record on the desk. It was an access log from the community office. Emily Carter's name appeared repeatedly beside the dates of the information transfers. Alexander stared at the page. For weeks, he would have accepted the evidence without hesitation. Now he remembered her tears, her unanswered letters, the families who trusted her, and the woman who had asked him to observe before reaching conclusions. Hale Leonid Kulusov. Your Majesty, your wife may be sending Blackwood's secrets to someone beyond our borders. Alexander slowly lifted his eyes. This time, suspicion was not the first thing he felt. The first thing he wondered was who wanted him to believe it. Alexander closed the folder and looked directly at Hale. "Who verified these access records?" Hale appeared surprised by the question. "The administrative office." "That was not what I asked." Alexander pushed the folder across the desk. "Who personally verified them?" Hale's confidence shifted almost imperceptibly. "I would have to check." "Then check." Alexander stood. "And until you do, this does not leave this room." Hale Fronit. Your Majesty, if the Queen is responsible, every hour we delay gives her another opportunity to transfer information. If she is responsible, evidence will prove it. If she is not, an accusation from this council could destroy her reputation before she has a chance to answer. You are allowing personal feelings to interfere with security. Alexander's eyes hardened. No, I am preventing suspicion from becoming a verdict. Hale left without another word. Alexander remained alone, staring at the access log. The old version of himself would already have confronted Emily. He would have placed the documents before her and demanded an explanation while assuming guilt behind every silence. Instead, he requested the original security records, transmission timestamps, and authorization logs. 2 hours later, he found Emily in the east sitting room organizing letters. She looked up when he entered. You look troubled. There is something I need to ask you. Her expression immediately became guarded. Alexander hated that he recognized the reaction as something he had taught her. Did you access confidential trade schedules through the community office? Emily frowned. No. Have you sent any Blackwood Council documents beyond the territory? No. Alexander nodded once. Emily stared at him. That is all. For now. You believe me? The question was quiet. I believe you deserve more than an accusation. Something softened in her face, but only briefly. What happened? Alexander hesitated. Records carrying your name were connected to leaked information. Emily slowly stood. And you came here alone? Yes. Not with guards. Not with the council. No. She searched his expression. You really have changed. Do not sound so surprised. You gave me several reasons to be. Before Alexander could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Margaret entered carrying an envelope. This arrived for Her Majesty. Emily took it and immediately recognized the handwriting. Alexander saw the color leave her face. Who sent it? She opened the letter, read 3 lines, then folded it quickly. Emily, I need some air. She moved toward the door. Alexander did not stop her. Does this concern the leaked documents? She froze. That hesitation was enough. I do not know, she admitted, but I know who may be behind them. Alexander waited. Emily turned slowly. The man who sent me the warning before our marriage. Who is he? Her voice dropped. My mother's brother, Thomas Carter. He helped negotiate the Southern Agreement, but he never wanted peace with Blackwood. He wanted control over it. Alexander felt the pieces begin shifting into a new shape. Why did you not tell me? Because I had no proof. Emily looked down at the letter. And because he told me that if I ever revealed his involvement, the protection agreement would disappear. Alexander stepped closer, stopping several feet away. What does the letter say? Emily handed it to him. There is only one sentence. Leave Blackwood before the council learns what you sacrificed to marry its king. Alexander read it twice. Then he looked at Emily. What did you sacrifice? Her eyes filled with the same fear he had seen when he mentioned the first letter. My inheritance, she whispered, and every legal claim my family had to the Southern Territory. I gave it all away before I married you. Alexander stared at Emily as though the room had shifted beneath him. You surrendered your inheritance? Emily folded her arms, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. The Carter estate controlled several transportation corridors connecting the southern communities to Blackwood. My uncle wanted to use those rights as leverage. As long as I remained the legal heir, he could pressure me to challenge the agreement after the marriage. So you transferred everything to an independent public trust. The roads, the storage facilities, the land rights. None of it belongs to me anymore, and none of it can be used against Blackwood. Alexander thought of every accusation he had made. He had believed Emily came seeking influence, while she had quietly surrendered the only political power she possessed. Before he could speak, the council chamber bell sounded from the central hall. Emily looked toward the door. They know. Minutes later, Alexander entered the chamber with Emily beside him. Every council seat was occupied. Hale stood near the head of the table. The copied security records spread before him. Your Majesty, we could not delay this matter any longer. Alexander remained standing. Apparently not. Hale turned toward Emily. Records show that confidential information was accessed under the Queen's credentials. Murmurs moved around the table. Emily kept her expression calm, but Alexander noticed her fingers tighten around the edge of her sleeve. Hale continued. Until this matter is resolved, I recommend that Her Majesty be removed from all administrative access and placed under formal restriction. Alexander looked around the chamber. On what verified evidence? Hale pointed toward the documents. The records are clear. The records are copies. Silence followed. Alexander placed another folder on the table. The original system logs have not yet been examined by an independent administrator. The transmission. Source has not been confirmed. No witness has identified Emily sending anything. Yet you are prepared to declare her guilty because her name appears on paper. Hale's face tightened. You cannot ignore the possibility. I'm not ignoring it. Alexander's voice remained controlled. I am refusing to confuse possibility with truth. Emily turned toward him, visibly stunned. Hale stepped forward. And if she betrayed Blackwood? Alexander did not look at Emily before answering. He did not need to. Then evidence will establish it, and we will face that truth together. But until that evidence exists, no one in this room will punish my wife for an accusation. The chamber became completely silent. Emily's eyes filled with emotion, but this time she did not look away. Alexander continued. Effective immediately, an independent review will examine every access record from the past 3 months, including those belonging to every member of this council. Hale's expression changed. It lasted less than a second, but Alexander saw it. Fear. The meeting ended without a verdict. Outside the chamber, Emily stopped him in the corridor. You defended me without knowing whether I was innocent. Alexander faced her. I believe you are innocent. That is not the same thing. No. He held her gaze. It is trust. Emily seemed unable to answer. Alexander reached into his coat and handed her the threatening letter. Your uncle wants you frightened enough to leave. Someone inside this council wants me suspicious enough to let you. Emily looked back toward the closed chamber doors. You think they are working together? I think someone made one mistake. What mistake? Alexander remembered Hale's expression when he announced the independent review. They expected me to choose the evidence they manufactured over the woman they thought I still hated. Emily looked at him quietly. And you did not. Alexander's voice softened. No. Before either could say more, Margaret hurried toward them carrying a sealed message from the security office. Alexander opened it. The independent administrator had already found the first irregularity. Emily's access credentials had been used at 2:30 in the morning 3 nights earlier. Alexander looked at her. That night, Emily had fallen asleep in the library, and he had personally seen her there. Someone had not merely accused his wife. Someone inside Blackwood had stolen her identity to do it. By sunrise, the independent review had uncovered more than Alexander expected. Emily's credentials had been copied through an administrative terminal inside the council offices, then used remotely to access confidential files after midnight. Only 4 people had authorization to modify those credentials. Councilman Richard Hale was one of them. Alexander read the report in silence, while Emily stood beside the window of his office. This proves I did not send the documents, she said. It proves someone used your identity. Alexander closed the folder. The rest will prove why. Emily turned toward him. You already suspect Hale. His reaction yesterday told me enough to investigate him, not enough to condemn him. A faint, almost sad smile crossed her face. You really are practicing. Apparently. I had an excellent teacher. Before Emily could respond, Margaret entered with another file recovered from the council archive. Inside were correspondence records between Hale and Thomas Carter dating back nearly 8 months. The messages revealed a carefully constructed plan. Thomas had wanted Emily married into Blackwood because the alliance guaranteed Southern protection, but he had never intended for her to become secure there. Once the agreement was permanent, Hale was supposed to isolate her politically, destroy Alexander's trust in her, and pressure her into leaving. If Emily abandoned the marriage voluntarily, Thomas believed he could challenge the public trust controlling the Carter transportation routes and reclaim influence over the Southern territory. Alexander's expression darkened as he reached the final page. He used you to secure the agreement, then planned to remove you from it. Emily looked strangely calm. That sounds like my uncle. You knew he was capable of this. I knew he valued power more than family. I did not know Hale was helping him. Alexander studied her. There is something else you have not told me. Emily walked toward the fireplace. For several moments, she said nothing. The letter you found after our wedding was not the only choice I was given. Alexander waited. 6 months ago, representatives from Blackwood approached my family about emergency protection for the southern communities. My uncle refused unless he received permanent authority over the trade corridors. I would never have agreed to that. He knew. Emily looked at him. So I made another offer. I would surrender my inheritance, place the transportation rights into a public trust, and marry you if the alliance required a permanent bond. Alexander stared at her. You proposed a marriage? Not directly to you. Her voice was quiet. I proposed the terms that made it possible. The realization struck him harder than any accusation. Emily had known she might marry a man who did not want her. She had known she would lose her inheritance. She had known her own family might turn against her. Still, she had agreed because strangers in struggling communities needed protection before winter. Why? Alexander asked. Emily seemed surprised by the question. Because people were going to lose their homes. Families were choosing between heating bills and food. Children had nothing to do with my uncle's ambitions. And you thought sacrificing your entire future was reasonable. No. Her eyes met his. I thought it was necessary. Alexander remembered the wedding night, his cold words, and the way she had stood beneath the ballroom lights, carrying a secret sacrifice while he treated her like an unwanted burden. Emily, I did not know. I know. Somehow, her forgiveness made the shame worse. A knock interrupted them. 2 independent administrators entered, followed by Hale. His confident expression had disappeared. The investigators presented the correspondence records and informed him that his council authority had been suspended pending a formal review. Hale looked toward Emily. You think this changes anything? Blackwood will never truly accept an outsider. Alexander stepped forward, but Emily spoke first. Maybe not everyone will. Her voice remained calm. But I did. Not come here to be accepted by men who only respect people they can control. Hale had no answer. After he left with the administrators, silence filled the office. Alexander looked at Emily differently now, not with pity and not with guilt alone. You saved thousands of people before anyone here even knew your name. Emily shook her head. I made a choice. Alexander stepped closer, leaving enough distance for her to decide whether to remain. Then I need to start making better ones. Emily looked into his eyes. What does that mean? Alexander thought about the marriage contract locked inside the Royal Archive. For the first time, he remembered a clause everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. A clause that could give Emily back the one thing she had surrendered long before her inheritance. Her freedom. Alexander spent the next morning in the Royal Archive with the marriage agreement spread across a long oak table. He found the clause exactly where he remembered it, buried beneath pages of territorial obligations and ceremonial language. Either spouse could request dissolution within the first year if both parties agreed that the marriage had been entered primarily for political necessity. The alliance itself would remain protected because the transportation rights now belonged to the independent public trust. Emily no longer had to remain his wife for the southern communities to remain secure. Alexander stared at the page until the truth became impossible to avoid. She was free. The realization should have relieved him. Instead, it frightened him more than anything had in years. That evening, he found Emily in the greenhouse. She stood beside the same dormant roses where he had once watched her cry alone. She noticed him immediately. You have been avoiding me. I have been thinking. That sounds dangerous. Alexander almost smiled. Emily, I owe you an apology. Her expression softened slightly. You already apologized. Not properly. He stepped closer, but stopped several feet away. I blamed you for a marriage you did not create alone. I judged your kindness as ambition because suspicion was easier than admitting I knew nothing about you. I made you feel unwanted in a home that was supposed to become yours. Emily looked down. Alexander, please let me finish. She nodded. Seeing you cry did not suddenly make me a better man. It only forced me to see the consequences of the man I had been. His voice lowered. Everything after that was something I should have noticed from the beginning. Emily remained silent for a long moment. Do you know what hurt most? She finally asked. Tell me. It was not that you did not love me. I never expected love. Her eyes glistened, but she did not look away. It was that you decided who I was before I had spoken enough words for you to know me. Alexander felt the truth settle heavily between them. You are right. Emily gave a quiet breath. I spent every day trying to prove I was not what you believed. Then I realized that if someone has already chosen a version of you in their mind, sometimes nothing you do can compete with it. You should never have had to prove yourself to me. No, and I cannot ask you to forget that. Emily studied him carefully. What are you asking? Alexander reached into his coat and removed a folded copy of the marriage clause, but he did not hand it to her yet. Nothing. Her brow furrowed. That is unusual for a king. I am learning. He looked at the document. There is a provision in our marriage agreement. Because the alliance is now independently protected, our marriage can be dissolved without affecting the southern territories. Emily became completely still. You want to end it? The question came so quietly that Alexander almost missed the pain beneath it. No, he answered immediately. That is the problem. Her eyes lifted to his. Alexander took a slow breath. I do not want you to leave, Emily. Somewhere between arguing with you at breakfast and watching you challenge an entire council without raising your voice, I stopped seeing this marriage as an obligation. He paused. But what I want cannot become another reason you are forced to stay. Emily looked at the paper in his hand. What happens now? Tomorrow, I sign my consent to the dissolution. Shock crossed her face. Alexander, after that, the decision belongs to you. And if I leave? He held her gaze despite how much the answer cost him. Then I will make certain you leave with your freedom, your dignity, and the knowledge that Blackwood will honor every promise made to the southern territories. Emily's eyes filled with tears. This time, Alexander did not mistake them for weakness, and he did not move closer unless she asked him to. Why would you do that? She whispered. Alexander looked at the woman he had once believed he could never love and finally answered without hiding behind duty. Because I would rather lose you by your own choice than keep you, because you never had one. The next morning, Emily found Alexander waiting in the council chamber with only Margaret and the royal legal advisor present. There were no council members, no witnesses from either territory, and no ceremony. A single document rested on the table. Alexander had already signed it. Emily stopped several feet away. You actually did it. I said I would. She approached slowly and looked down at his signature beneath the dissolution clause. One empty line remained beneath hers. If I sign this, what happens to Blackwood? Nothing. And the southern communities? Their protection remains permanent. The public trust cannot be reversed by your uncle or anyone else. Emily looked at him. And what happens to you? Alexander almost smiled. That is not a legal question. I am asking anyway. The room became quiet. I return to being king, he said. Alone. Alexander did not answer immediately. If that is what you choose. Emily stared at the document. For weeks, she had dreamed of having a choice. Now that freedom rested beneath her hand, she discovered that freedom could be painful too. She picked up the pen, but did not sign. I need time. Take all of it. Alexander turned toward the advisor. Prepare transportation wherever Emily wishes to go. No restrictions. Emily looked at him sharply. You think I am leaving? I think you should know who you are when you are not trying to survive a marriage you never expected to be happy in. The words reached somewhere deep inside her. And if I discover that person does not belong here, Alexander held her gaze. Then Blackwood will still be better because you were here. 2 days later, Emily packed a single suitcase. She left the royal dresses untouched and carried only the belongings she had brought with her, along with the letter she had written to her mother and never sent. Margaret cried quietly while helping her close the case. He loves you, she said. Emily looked toward the window. I know. Saying it aloud frightened her. Do you love him? Emily took a long breath. I do not know whether I love who he was, who he is becoming, or the possibility of who he might have been. Margaret nodded. Then perhaps leaving is how you find out. Alexander waited near the main entrance when Emily came downstairs. Snow covered the Blackwood grounds, and a car stood ready beyond the steps. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander handed her a small envelope. Your copy of the agreement. Emily accepted it. You did not sign the final dissolution. Neither did you. So technically we are still married. Technically. A faint smile appeared between them and disappeared just as quickly. Emily looked at the man who had once told her she would never have his heart. Now he stood before her with every opportunity to ask her to stay, and he remained silent. You're not going to stop me, she asked. Alexander's expression tightened with emotion. Every selfish part of me wants to. But if I ask you now, you may stay because you feel responsible for what leaving would do to me. He shook his head. I will not turn your compassion into another cage. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She stepped closer, then stopped. Alexander, when I came here, I thought strength meant enduring whatever happened without letting anyone see it hurt. And now I think strength might mean admitting when something matters enough to hurt. Alexander looked at her as if he wanted to remember every detail of that moment. Emily turned toward the waiting car. She made it halfway down the steps before stopping. For one impossible second, Alexander thought she might return. Instead, she looked back. Do not become the man I needed only because I am leaving. Alexander's voice was steady. I will become him because you showed me I should have been better all along. Emily nodded, then entered the car. Alexander remained on the steps as it disappeared beyond the gates. He did not follow. He did not issue an order. He simply let the woman he loved leave with the freedom he should have given her from the beginning. Inside the envelope resting on Emily's lap was the unsigned dissolution agreement. Beneath it, Alexander had placed one handwritten note. Whatever you choose next, let finally be yours. For the first time in months, Emily woke without a schedule chosen by someone else. She had rented a small cottage near North Hollow, less than 10 miles from the families whose struggles had first drawn her into Blackwood's affairs. The house was modest, with 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and windows overlooking snow-covered fields. No attendants waited outside her door. No counsel expected her presence. No crown rested inside a velvet case. She should have felt completely free. Instead, every morning began with the same unexpected realization. She missed Alexander. Not the alpha king who had judged her before knowing her. Not the distant husband who had treated their marriage like a punishment. She missed the man who had learned to listen, who had trusted her before the evidence cleared her name, and who had stood on the steps of Blackwood while every instinct told him to stop her and chose not to. 3 weeks passed. Emily worked with the public trust, helping Southern communities establish permanent supply agreements independent of political families. She visited North Hollow schools, attended community meetings, and finally began answering the letters she had once written only to her mother. Her life belonged entirely to her. That was how she knew the emptiness she felt was not captivity calling her back. At Blackwood, Alexander kept his promise too. He did not send messengers asking Emily to return. He did not use council business as an excuse to contact her. He continued the independent reform she had begun, creating a public review system for community requests and removing Hale permanently after the formal investigation. Confirmed his cooperation with Thomas Carter. Thomas lost all influence over the Transportation Trust, and the Southern Protection Agreement remained untouched. Alexander had become the man Emily had asked him to become, even when she was no longer there to see it. One evening, Margaret visited Emily carrying no message from him. They sat beside the cottage fireplace, drinking coffee. How is he? Emily finally asked. Margaret smiled knowingly. Busy. That was not what I meant. I know. Margaret set down her cup. He eats dinner in the small dining room now. Emily looked up. Why? He says the large table is ridiculous. Despite herself, Emily laughed. Margaret continued. Your chair is still there. Emily's smile faded. Margaret, he does not sit staring at it tragically, if that is what you are imagining. He works. He argues with the council. He remembers people's names now. That sounded exhausting for him. Terribly. They both smiled. Then Margaret reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Emily's expression changed. He sent this. No, the legal office did. Inside was a notice stating that the dissolution option would expire in 14 days. Emily read it twice. If she signed, the marriage would end permanently. If she did nothing, she would remain Alexander's wife. That night, Emily placed the document beside the original agreement and Alexander's handwritten note. Whatever you choose next, let finally be yours. She sat there until after midnight. Then she understood the question she had been trying to answer since leaving Blackwood. Did she love Alexander because he had changed, or had she simply become attached to the hope that he might? The answer came when she remembered something Margaret had said. He was still changing when Emily was not there to reward him for it. For days later, Alexander entered the council chamber and stopped. The chair beside his was still empty, as it had been every morning since Emily left. He began the meeting without looking at it. 30 minutes later, the doors opened. Every person in the room turned. Margaret stood in the doorway, smiling. Alexander slowly rose. "Your Majesty," she said, "there is someone waiting for you in the greenhouse." Alexander did not ask who. He already knew. And for the first time since Emily had driven through the gates, the Alpha King forgot entirely about the empty chair beside his throne. Alexander crossed the distance to the greenhouse faster than dignity usually allowed an Alpha King to move. He stopped outside the glass doors, suddenly afraid that expectation had created something reality could not fulfill. Then he saw her. Emily stood beside the dormant roses where he had once found her crying alone. She wore a simple cream coat, her brown hair resting loosely over her shoulders, and in her hand was the dissolution agreement. Alexander entered quietly. Emily turned at the sound of the door. For several seconds, neither spoke. "You came back," he finally said. "I did." His eyes dropped to the document. "Have you made your decision?" Emily looked down at the paper. "Yes." Alexander forced himself to remain still. "Whatever it is, I will respect it." "I know." She walked toward him and placed the document on a nearby table. Alexander saw her signature at the bottom. His expression changed before he could hide it. Emily noticed. "You should read what I signed." Alexander looked again. She had not signed the dissolution line. Instead, beneath the agreement, she had written a formal declaration withdrawing her request to consider ending the marriage. Alexander slowly lifted his eyes. "Emily, I needed to leave." Her voice remained steady. "I needed to know whether I missed you, because Blackwood had become familiar, because I felt responsible for you, or because I was afraid to begin again." She stepped closer, and he asked quietly, "I built a life without you." Alexander swallowed. "I know. I like that life." A faint smile touched her face. "That is why I can trust my decision now." Understanding appeared slowly in his eyes. Emily continued, "I'm not returning because the Southern Territories need me here. They do not. I'm not returning because I need your title, your protection, or this palace. I discovered that I can stand on my own." Alexander looked at her with an emotion too deep for words. "Then why are you here?" Emily took a breath. "Because once I knew I could live without you, I finally understood that I wanted to live with you." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, as though the words had reached somewhere he had kept guarded for years. When he looked at her again, his voice was unsteady. "I do not deserve how much faith you have placed in the man I am trying to become. Then do not ask me to love you, because you deserve it." Emily's eyes softened. "Let me love you because I choose to." Alexander remained where he was, giving her the final distance between them. Emily crossed it herself and took his hand. "There is something I should tell you," he said. "That sounds serious." "It is." His thumb rested gently against her fingers. "I love you." Emily smiled through sudden tears. "You once promised I would never have your heart. I was an arrogant fool. That is the most accurate royal statement you have made." Alexander laughed, and Emily did too. Then her expression became tender. "I love you, Alexander. Not because you are the Alpha King. Not because you protected me. I love you because when you finally had something you wanted more than anything, you refused to take away my choice to keep it." Months later, Emily would still work with North Hollow and the Southern Public Trust. She would challenge council decisions, ignore unnecessary traditions, and occasionally remind Alexander that 20-foot dining tables were ridiculous. Alexander would continue learning that leadership required listening more often than commanding. Their marriage did not become perfect. It became honest. And whenever they passed through the greenhouse, Alexander remembered the night he had seen his Omega bride crying alone and realized that her tears had never been the moment she became weak. They were the moment he finally understood how strong she had been all along. He had once believed power meant never surrendering what belonged to him. Emily taught him something greater. Love was not proven by holding someone tightly enough that they could never leave. It was proven by opening the door, stepping aside, and trusting that if their heart truly chose you, they might one day walk back through it freely.